This is Michael Popok, Legal AF. There is a battle brewing between Clarence Thomas, his multi-billionaire patron, Harlan Crowe, and the Senate Finance and Judiciary Committee following revelations and investigative reporting of ProPublica back in March about the close, incestuous financial relationship and patronage between Harlan Crowe, one of the heirs, the Trammell Crowe real estate empire, and Clarence Thomas, who's been sitting on the U.S. Supreme Court for over 30 years. A relationship that until March was unknown to the American people, not transparent, not disclosed by Clarence Thomas or, of course, Harlan Crowe to anybody. Who's Harlan Crowe? You never heard of him. He's a mega GOP Republican donor to all things right-wing and conservative, including the Federalist Society, including giving $500,000 to Clarence Thomas's wife for her Tea Party movement foundation, $500,000. But that's not even the largesse that's been bestowed upon and showered upon Ginny and Clarence Thomas by Harlan Crowe. Millions of dollars of luxury travel on yachts, mega yachts, private airplanes, $4,000, $5,000 a night resorts, paid for. Clarence Thomas paid for by Harlan Crowe too, but paid for by Harlan Crowe going back 10 or 15 years. But that's not all. I feel like a late night pitch person for an infomercial. If you act now, you'll get a set of steak knives and a juicer. Harlan Crowe also bought not one, not two, but three separate real estate pieces of property that Clarence Thomas owned, some of which he couldn't even sell to anybody. But in a pinch, and right in the nick of time, Harlan Crowe bought these properties, including the old childhood home of Clarence Thomas, for, again, numbers verging into the millions of dollars. And he had business in front of the court. At least one of his subsidiaries of the Trammell Crowe empire had a case in front of the Supreme Court while Clarence Thomas, of course, was sitting there and did not disqualify or recuse himself, let alone all the money he's given to conservative causes that end up being used to file briefs and lawsuits that end up where? At the U.S. Supreme Court. All this got blown away, blown up, and put into the public mind now, so we can never forget it, by investigative reporting at ProPublica. Why does it matter? Because some people might be saying, well, what are we going to do about that? The House is controlled by MAGA Republicans. Who cares? There's no, in these co-equal branches of government, who's going to come to the rescue? The Supreme Court, led by John Roberts, has thumbed its nose at the American people and said, trust us, trust us. Why me worry? Sounds like Alfred E. Newman. Trust us. We don't need a code of ethics at the Supreme Court. We're the Supreme Court. And of course, we see what happens when there's no code of ethics. So the Supreme Court has abdicated all responsibility of self-policing and creating an ethics rule. So that leaves it to the other two branches of government. The problem is the U.S. Constitution puts into separate spheres these entities, and the Judiciary is in, the Supreme Court is in its own branch, and the executive branch, the president, and the House and the Senate in Articles 1, 2, and 3, right there, right at the very beginning of our founding documents and papers, right? Well, right, except the oversight that Congress can have over the other branches, whether presidential or in this case judicial, exists. The power to investigate exists. And the Senate is fortunately controlled by the Democrats. So the Democrats on the panel, let's say the Senate Judiciary Committee, led at the time now by Dick Durbin, and the Senate Finance Committee, led by Ron Wyden, a Democrat from Oregon, they can issue subpoenas just like their counterparts in the House. And so first it started about a month ago with the Dick Durbin in the Judiciary Committee issuing a subpoena and a request for information to, what started as a request for information it's likely to become a subpoena, to Harlan Crowe, Citizen Crowe, asking him to provide the committee with all the information about all the trips and travel real estate investments, other financial arrangements and entanglements between him, Clarence Thomas, and Ginny Thomas, and do it quickly. Well, Harlan Crowe went out and got a mega law firm, Gibson Dunn, and a guy named Michael Bopp to write a letter in which Michael Bopp tried to teach Senator Durbin, the head of the Judiciary Committee, the basics of the three co-equal branches of government, the separation of powers, and says, you can't go after my guy because you can't go after Clarence Thomas, and you can't investigate Clarence Thomas. It's almost like he's writing it for Clarence Thomas, who I'm sure saw a copy of this letter before it went out and said, sorry, you can't just do an expose for exposure's sake. You don't have any legitimate legislative purpose as the judicial branch, and we're not turning over any of these documents to you. Go pound sand. To which Dick Durbin said, I don't remember history well, but I don't think your client, Mr. Crowe, ever served on the Supreme Court, so he doesn't get to make the separation of powers argument. That's reserved for Mr. Thomas if we ever have, Justice Thomas in front of us. And the reason that Durbin said they have the legislative power is they're getting to the bottom of a code of ethics that they're going to try to impose by one way or the other, maybe by withholding funding and money from the Supreme Court. Supreme Court, you think you do a good job, you don't need the other branches of government? Go ahead, go on your own. Try a fundraiser, try a bake sale, run your huge judicial apparatus nationally at the highest levels in the Supreme Court. Do it on yourself. DIY, do it yourself. Go on, John Roberts, go on YouTube, figure out how to run your branch of government without our money that's being appropriated by Congress. So there is the power of the purse, and Dick Durbin is reminding them of that. So you may want to give an ethics code and adopt one, or we may do something else and cut off your umbilical cord of funds. Well, when Trammell Crow's heir, Harlan Crowe, who, by the way, also a Nazi and Hitler memorabilia collector, try to get that out of your brain while I'm finishing my hot take. The other committee that's interested in policy setting is the Finance Committee. And the Finance Committee is responsible for Internal Revenue Service, Internal Revenue Code, taxes, and the like. And they're doing an investigation to look into how people at the very top of mega wealthy, like Donald Trump, like Harlan Crowe, how they avoid or evade or limit taxes improperly. And as part of that, they want to get to the bottom of how Harlan Crowe paid his taxes related to the gifts that were given and apparently not reported to Clarence Thomas. And if they don't get it from him, and as of right now, the same law firm, Gibson Dunn, the same lawyer, Michael Bopp, writing virtually the same letter to the Finance Committee, is telling them to go pound sand, almost as if they're writing again for Clarence Thomas. We're not giving you all the gift records. We're not giving you all the vacation and travel records, the real estate transaction records. And, I left this out in the hot take, trying to cram everything in here. I'm trying to cram like 20 pounds of potatoes into a 5-pound sack. Harlan Crowe also paid for Clarence Thomas's, one of his kids' tuition, private school tuition. So add that to the list of things on the whiteboard against Clarence Thomas in terms of things that weren't disclosed. And so the Finance Committee is like, we better go take a look at all that, because our fellow colleagues over at Senate Judiciary are looking at ethics rules, and we're looking at it from a taxing situation. Did you, Mr. Crowe, pay taxes? How did you account for all of these gifts, vacations, lavish other compensatory things to Clarence Thomas? How was that accounted for? And let's look at Clarence Thomas's returns and compare them, and then we'll make policy around it. So as of right now, despite a second demand by the Senate Finance Committee led by Democrat Mr. Wyden, Senator Wyden, and the Senate Judiciary Committee making a second demand against Harlan Crowe to turn over this information, so far it's been met with tremendous resistance. And now it's, in this chess match, in this cat and mouse, it's now advantage cat. And they're going to come back, I am sure, with a subpoena to subpoena the records and testimony of Harlan Crowe to come before one or both of these committees as they continue to make policy of transparency, as they try to regulate the best they can a rogue and out of control Supreme Court. I'm going to follow it on Hot Takes just like this one, only on the MeidasTouch network. I do it about every day at the intersection of U.S. law and politics. I do it on a podcast called Legal AF, which is the leading news and law and politics podcast, also on the MeidasTouch network on YouTube. Every place you can pull your podcast. If you like what I'm doing on a hot take like this, give me a thumbs up. It helps. It helps with the quality and the content and the quantity of what we're doing here on the MeidasTouch network. And you can follow me, Michael Popok, on all things social media at MS Popok. This is Michael Popok, Legal AF reporting.
Hey, Meidas Mighty. Love this report? Continue the conversation by following us on Instagram at MeidasTouch to keep up with the most important news of the day. What are you waiting for? Follow us now.